Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, I think, on the East Coast. Excited to have you all here. We'll give everyone a couple of minutes to trickle in before we start introductions, before everything else. But when we get started, I usually like to ask our speakers, and Pete in this case, what their fun trips coming up are, and the summer's coming up. So, what's everyone's summer plan situation? Pete, anything fun going on this summer?
Well, before summer, or I guess I'm kicking off the summer by going to the Gartner Sales Summit. I'm excited about that. So one of our larger customers, they have about 1,000 reps on Atrium, texted me and was like, "Are you going to Gartner?" And I was like, "I wasn't. Are you?" And they're like, "Yeah, we are." I'm like, "Well, I guess I am now." So that's I'm kicking off this summer by going and hanging out with some rev ops and sales leadership at Las Vegas, which I otherwise kind of try to avoid, but like it's kind of the only place that can support a conference the size of Gartner. Lisa, what about you? What are the plans this summer?
We are doing a New England road trip. So wish me
Oh
luck with
wow.
that with two teenagers. But I'm Canadian, so I there's a lot of the US that I haven't seen, even though I've lived here for a long time. So yeah, we're gonna drive from Canada to Maine to Boston to Rhode Island to home in North Carolina. Yeah.
So you're gonna fly from North Carolina to Canada.
Now we're
No,
driving. Yeah.
you're
So
gonna
my
drive
kids,
straight to Canada and then ta 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 ta. Ta.
yes. So
Wow.
thoughts and
Okay.
prayers. Thanks.
I was gonna say on purpose.
Yeah.
That's funny. That sounds good though. Like it'll be fun. Family bonding experience.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, we have another Canadian here. We got
Oh,
Ralph.
nice.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Love it. Um, well, with that, you should be here to see Here to Win how Vimeo created a sales culture of high performance. Pete's going to give a little bit of context on what that means. Lisa's going to chime in with her experience at Vimeo and really how she helped create that culture of high performance. But you're going to be locked in for the next 57 minutes, and I'm going to pass it off to Pete with that.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks for organizing this. I really appreciate it. And thank you very much, Lisa, for joining us. I'm super pumped. I haven't had the pleasure of being on a video call with you for a hot second, but everyone here is in for a super duper treat. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here quickly. We'll start with some introductions, but you guys are kind of lucky insofar as you have the revenue operations leader for a fairly vaunted B2B brand. If you have ever used an application that uses video rails, I bet you dollars to donuts. Probably some of those bits and bytes float across Vimeo software. So, but importantly, Lisa's here to kind of talk with us about kind of change management associated with kind of like changing and reinstilling a sales performance culture. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second, and like essentially how to go about doing that for organizations that need to zhuzh up their sales performance. So for folks that don't know me, my name's Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. We make sales performance management software that helps sales organizations improve rep performance. Prior to Atrium, I started a recruiting software company called TalentBin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And really, at TalentBin, I went from being a business generalist founder to our first seller. To our first sales manager and then leader. And then once we were acquired by Monster, I was responsible for new product sales across a 600-person sales organization. And so I've kind of seen, performance excellent, analytically excellent, operationally excellent sales at a variety of scales. Also wrote a book on startup sales there. So I think a little bit about sales here and there. So that's me. And then Lisa, maybe you can give a little bit of an introduction of yourself, kind of what you spend your time on at Vimeo and some of the other kind of sales motions that you worked on previously.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Lisa Jensen. I lead the RevOps team here at Vimeo. I've been here about 18 months. Primarily, what I'm focused on is pipeline generation, forecasting, insights, and analytics, which is pretty much how I've spent most of my career. I started my career in finance for about 10 years and then wisely escaped to move over into RevOps. So yeah, I love the RevOps space and love helping sales leaders kind of see around the corners. Top of funnel and forecasting are really kind of my passions, so to speak, in the working world.
I love it. Yes, and Lisa and her team, uh, she like all good leaders who are have high acumen. She also has a tendency to attract high acumen people as well. They are always the the toast of our account management team here at Atrium. Whenever they get off of calls with Lisa and her team, they're always like, "Man, those." I wish everyone was like those guys. Um, so cool. And I think one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit here is that Vimeo is an interesting an interesting case study and kind of share some characteristics like a lot of organizations that had a pretty substantial performance tailwind during COVID. In Vimeo's case, it wasn't just like a financial tailwind from the zero interest rate kind of like period, but also it was the fact that there was a lot of organizations, a lot of software that was adopting video for a variety of use cases, and Vimeo was in a great spot to kind of capitalize on that. And then of course when that fell off, both from a SaaS compression standpoint, kind of in 2022, 2023, but then also as some of that kind of COVID tailwind fell off, the organization needed to refine its footing from a or from a sales performance standpoint, and had to start doing things that maybe they hadn't done in a hot second, like prospecting and top of funnel and kind of performance management sort of things. And these are very similar stories that we've heard all across our customers. And I think the organization has done some really interesting stuff in terms of like tackling that. It's not an overnight fix, because whenever you're dealing with like hundreds of human beings that are resistant to change, obviously that requires a lot of management, etc. But the good news is that Lisa is here to kind of share some of her expertise for folks who might be encountering that. Um, we're previewing this with all y'all here today. We actually wrote kind of like the book rendition of this presentation that I've been kind of like giving for the last year or so, where I've kind of been accreting together a lot of the kind of components that have been driving what we like to call the sales performance gap. Um, in the last like 5 to 10 years, and kind of like cohered that into a book. If you guys would like a copy of that, go ahead. I think we're gonna go ahead and drop a link here in the chat, or alternatively, you can like whip out your iPhone and take a little user camera to scan that QR code, and get yourself a copy of that. So previewing it here, we haven't really publicized it more broadly than that, but looking forward to your feedback on that. So, first and foremost, one of the things I want to talk about here, this presentation is really in two sections. One, I'm going to present to you why we think that sales management matters, and specifically why performance management ends up being super important. And then the second thing is that we're going to talk about how you can kind of go about doing that. Obviously, we have a preference for how organizations can go about doing that, because we sell software that kind of helps make that easier. But there's a variety of other behaviors, kind of like processes that can be used in order to do this, that that is not Atrium centric. So kind of the first and foremost thing that we like to talk about is that organizations that put frontline management and sales management on like at the forefront end up being more highly performant. This is something that Gartner's talked about quite a bit. You get a variety of benefits, whether it's like higher per rep productivity, or better retention, or better effort. But the bigger thing, really what it kind of comes down to, is you shift more of your reps that are kind of like mid performers into the higher performing category. You essentially take people and you can move them one standard deviation to the right, if you will, right? And the way that you do that, of course, is by by managing and changing those individuals' behaviors. Um, Michelle Vazana kind of talks about this in her book. She's the co-author of Cracking the Sales Management Code, which I have right here. One of my favorite sales, kind of like data-driven sales management books. Michelle was the co-author of that, and then she wrote her own book that is about applied kind of sales analytics. And so she kind of summarizes this here, where the kind of the takeaways are that the top quartile managers end up generating dramatically more revenue than the bottom quartile ones. And really the reason why is because they have a tendency to get more of their reps through quotas. You're not really taking your high performers and getting them to perform even higher, because at a certain point you kind of cap out in terms of days in the week, et cetera, um, for those high performers to to like close more business. But really what it is it's about getting your mid performers and kind of like your mid higher performers, getting those folks to be higher performing there. And so these are the kind of like the big takeaways, is that if you empower your managers to engage in more managerial behaviors, and as relates to performance, you're going to see better outcomes associated with that. So I'm going to pause really quickly here. Lisa, any kind of commentary on this as relates to your experience at Vimeo and kind of before that?
Yeah, I totally agree. One thing we look at Vimeo is like the quota bell curves, right? And trying to determine how many of our reps are in that like 40 to 60% attainment range, which is generally where
Yep.
you want your reps to be. So once you start seeing like maybe a couple of reps over to the right that are, way overachieving, and then everybody else is kind of not achieving, that's when you
Yep.
have capacity issues and things like that. So yeah, I totally agree. Getting the majority of your reps, even if it's 5% better, you're going to see like a huge improvement.
Yeah, for sure. And unfortunately, like cool sounds great on paper, but like how do we do that? And it turns out that much like rep behavior needs to be managed, and they need to do specific things, like you know uh, their pipe gen days, or their pipe hygiene day, or their pipe hygiene times. Like they have to do certain behaviors. The managers also have to do certain behaviors as well. Like it just doesn't happen on its own, unfortunately. And so the way that we kind of think about that is like, three big buckets. One, encouragement. Sales is hard. Managers should be in the cheerleading business. Um, Most managers actually don't have a hard time with that, especially in the last 10 years. Like they kind of default to that. Um, the next thing that managers also have to do is they have to do coaching behavior, right? And so, of course, coaching is different than just blowing rainbows. It's actually diagnosing what's going on and then correcting improvement areas as well, right? So it's like, oh, hey, like you have a hitch in your giddy up right here, whatever that might be. And for folks that might empathize with this, Lisa is she's getting good at golf, because trying to get sales organizations to be higher performant isn't crazy making enough for her. So instead she decided that she was going to put this on her back as well. And I'm sure that there's a lot of coaching that goes on there as well. But like whatever the player is, you're going to have a different hitch in your swing, and that needs to be remediated. And the way that that gets remediated is not by saying everything's cool, but instead saying no, you need to keep your head down, or no, you need to do XYZ. So like that's the next thing that people have to do. And then the last thing that managers love to avoid, is just accountability. And that's doing the things that ends up being less fun, and making sure that folks are actually doing it. And then this is actually kind of distinct from coaching, because like coaching kind of ends up being like a skill thing, right? Where there may be a gap in skills, there may be an opportunity, but sometimes you just need to make sure that humans being humans, that they're doing the things that they signed up to do, and you need to make sure that that actually is happening, right? And so this is what managers should be doing, where they should be doing it. um, like I'm a big operating rhythm guy, and because making sure that people have a recipe for their their week to week ends up making it such that folks are more likely to make that happen. These are kind of like the different places where you could end up uh, making those things happen. So one, deal inspection and strategy, making sure that you're having recurring pipeline reviews in order to catch issues on a deal by deal basis. But of course, and most managers, this is the thing that they have a tendency to do. They love to do it. They love to talk deals. They have a tendency to come from that from a background standpoint. Um, but the next thing, of course, is having what we like to call database one-on-ones, like performance one-on-ones, distinct from pipeline reviews there. Um, and those are places where issue identification and fixing can happen. This is where goals that have been set from a leading indicator standpoint should be being tracked. You can do the same thing when you have reps that are in ramp there. And this is places where we can kind of standardize the behaviors of kind of our high performers, right? Um, and so what the challenge, of course, like this is what people should be doing. The challenge that we typically see when we talk to customers, though, is that managers have a tendency to either struggle or avoid to do a lot of these things. And there's kind of two major big reasons why. One, managers, for the most part, um, they don't love a dashboard. Uh, so giving them walls of charts, as we like to kind of talk about, ends up being kind of an exercise in futility. One, either they're busy, they're they're not going to consume that, or two, they just don't come from the most analytically kind of fluent background. One of the things that we like to joke about here, and like I fully cop to this myself, is that most managers and sales leaders, they come from the words department. They don't come from the math department, right? Like that's how you're a successful seller is through being persuasive and empathetic and a good communicator and charismatic. Um, and like that's usually, if you're going to be a manager or a leader, you have to be a successful seller initially, and so there's a little bit of a filtration bias there. And then the second thing is that managers in general, and this is especially the case for like junior managers, and especially the case in the last like 5 to 10 years, where like the economic environment has made it such that there hasn't been as much of a need for performance management. They love to avoid those coaching conversations or those performance management conversations. And so these are kind of like the two big blockers that we see in kind of gating achieving this right here through these behaviors. Lisa, anything you want to? I mean, you've been around the block here for a sec, at Vimeo and Salsify, Elastic, and kind of SAS. Any kind of comments you would like to make on kind of like the persistence of, or like the commonality of kind of these shortfalls?
Yeah, I mean, us in RevOps, we love some dashboards, right? So it's
Totally.
easy for us to throw up like, here's the 300 metrics you need to measure. But really, it's all about keeping things simple and making sure that what the CRO is being measured on is the same thing that the VPs and the managers and the reps are all being measured on, so that it's consistent all the way up. And it's hard, right? Like managers don't want to be the Debbie Downers and, get onto the reps. It's a hard job. Like it's a really, really hard job. So I think a lot of managers don't know how to deliver that coaching, and keep
Totally.
it data driven, and you can do it in a positive way. But it is definitely a skill to be learned that, a lot of, I don't know if you've seen on TikTok, like the millennial boss who's always like very chill and like wants to do what all of the reps want to do. Right. But it is definitely a skill to be learned, and, your sellers aren't going to get better unless you help coach them.
Yeah, for sure. And yes, bless up that. And then here, I'm trying to find the thing here. Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that, Lisa, because like this is literally the driver behind the book that we wrote here. And then also like I've given the presentation, and I think I'm going to go ahead and drop the chat here. But there's a number of reasons why that has been less, that those skills have kind of deteriorated in the market. And so it's kind of incumbent on us as leaders to help our managers reacquire those skills. Like, one, recognize the importance of these behaviors. Like, this is actually your job. You are contrary to what you may see on LinkedIn or on TikTok, your job is to not be like your professional best friends with your staff. It is like being friendly is part of it, but it is not the only thing, and it is not a sufficient thing. And then also, like, what the actual kind of football moves are, if you will, in order to do the actual managerial behavior. Wonderful. So hopefully we've made a good argument here around why it's important to do performance management. And so the next thing we're going to talk about is how to do it. It's just some ideas around how to do this. And I think maybe what we can kind of do a little bit here as a case study is the Vimeo team has done a lot of really great work around systematizing um, uh, pipeline generation behaviors across their entire sales organizations. This is a very, very common thing that we hear across our customer base, is the importance of uh, self-sourcing pipeline for full cycle reps, so account executives, account managers, largely because you've seen a shift in SDR to AE AM ratios, because in order to enhance kind of customer acquisition costs or cost of sales ratios or whatever, essentially just to make organizations kind of like more financially healthy. And as a result, what that means is a requirement for more self-prospecting behavior on the part of account executives and account managers. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the mechanism by which that prospecting behavior happens, with kind of the rise and fall of sales engagement software, and kind of the explosion of automated sequences and what have you, and everybody's inboxes are kind of like overrun with automated sequences. The phone has become a lot more important. And so what that has meant is also driving more calling behavior in the context of that pipeline generation. So I think maybe we can kind of talk about that a little bit as we're kind of going through these various steps for folks to kind of take there. But before we get into that, I just want to give a little bit of a shout out to kind of how we think organizations should go about this, or how our customers kind of go about this with Atrium. I mean, typically, like, the folks that we like to talk to are folks who have had some sort of performance outcome, adverse performance outcome, that has made it such that they say, now is the time that we need to really address our performance management rhythm, and to kind of tackle this, what we like to call the sales performance gap. Typically, these are the leading indicators associated with it, either poor quota attainment or participation, right? Either poor attainment across the board, or you have some kind of high flyers that are bailing everybody else out, and then of course, like, the rest of the kind of the group is kind of behind. We're seeing organizations that are seeing inconsistent pipe movement or conversion. The pipe is maybe coming in the top of the funnel, but for whatever reason it's not moving along, and they need to do a better job of that. Insufficient kind of pipe coverage as a result of kind of pipe gen. Inconsistent managerial behaviors through frontline managers, so like what we like to call artisanal management, where maybe you've got 20 managers, and like 5 are managing one way and 5 are managing another and 5 are managing another way. So like there's like not a consistency associated with that, or just kind of like plain old like hustle. Like, it's time for us to get our act together. It's time for us to raise the level of customer facing activity across the board. And what we have observed is that the driver of most of these things are kind of the things that we talked about previously. Managers have a tendency to love spending kind of time on their down funnel deals. They get overwhelmed with dashboards, and so as a result, they don't really hold reps accountable. The way that Atrium tackles that is we automate a lot of that, using AI plus statistics. Atrium has 100 plus metrics that work straight out of the box by hooking into your CRM and your email and calendar system, that are kind of in these large buckets here. Measure pipe creation, hygiene, movement, and activity, plus any kind of crazy custom KPI organizations might want to make. the legacy way of kind of doing this is like, hey, let's make a bunch of dashboards, make a bunch of reports that someone like myself or someone like Lisa, we love to make, and we also love to interpret, but the frontline management and reps maybe struggle to interpret that. And the way that we tackle that here at Atrium is to use large language model AI to then synthesize that and communicate to the managers and to the reps exactly where the shortfall is on from a performance standpoint and what to do about it. How we do that is we hook into the CRM, the email and calendar system. All those metrics come out of that. Organizations then, create any metric they want. They set goals on those. The software then monitors that statistically, like, hey, are we pacing towards, like, we have an expectation on a monthly basis that you're supposed to engage with, at least 20 of your assigned target accounts, Mr. AE. But boy, howdy, it's end of the first week and you're at 0. Right? So we're not pacing to goal here. So pacing towards goals, trends, et cetera. And then, of course, the AI then synthesizes that and communicates it to the managers, to the reps, talks directly to the reps as well. So ends up when organizations deploy this, they typically end up seeing, anywhere between a 20 to 200% improvement on whatever the initiative is that they're engaged in. So it might be like a prospecting and self-sourcing pipeline initiative like this, the Vimeo folks. It might just be like an old school customer facing meeting behavior initiative. It might be a pipeline advancement initiative, what have you. As soon as if you start measuring and then managing those KPIs, like, good things typically end up happening. And as a result, we've won a number of awards from a variety of analyst groups who have been a fan of this approach. And we've been lucky enough to have the Vimeo team as customers for the last couple of years as well, who've kind of been on this journey themselves. Lisa, any kind of comments you'd like to make on that before we kind of keep rolling here?
Yeah, I think one thing I want to mention, something that Atrium helped us do too, is we found that a lot of the reps, like, yeah, it's great to set goals, but how do you know what the right goal is? So one thing we did at the beginning of this year that was really, really helpful was we created a territory plan, basically template. So it gave them the number of the accounts in their territory plus their quota, so that they could figure out, okay, based on my AOV, my average order value, and my average win rate, how many deals do I need to close? Okay, based on that, how many deals do I need to create? How many, based on my meeting conversion, how many meetings do I need to have? How many emails do I need to have? So it was very prescriptive. Because if you're like running a race, right, and you don't know where the end is, you don't know how fast or slow to go, right? So it's it's so much easier once you have a number of things that you're going after. So that was hugely helpful for us.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's for folks may have heard Lisa essentially describing a sales funnel in reverse, which she was talking about bookings and opportunities, right? And then prospecting, et cetera, et cetera. It was a funnel in reverse in order to get to this number. And you'll notice she also didn't just talk about like bookings and then pipeline or like pipeline coverage or whatever, because those are lagging indicators. And the reality is that lagging indicators are very hard for us to directly impact. So Jason Jordan talks about this in Cracking the Sales Management Code by using the framework activities, objectives, and results, right? So like the results are the touchdown, right, or the score at the end. And then of course, like our objectives are our path along the way, right? Are we getting to the 20-yard line? Are we getting to the 50-yard line? Are we getting to the red zone? And then of course the activities are like, unfortunately, you can't just like wish to get to the 50-yard line or the red zone or whatever. You actually have to run and push and like do the efforts to do those sort of things. And those are the activities there as well. And so, Lisa is just very like obviously very fluent in these sort of things. And she just like, rattles it off right there. But it's important that it's all the way up and down those metrics, and it's not just the outputs, because if you only measure the outputs, you're gonna, generally speaking, you're gonna you're going to have some situations where you're going to have negative surprises that you could have seen coming around the corner if you were paying attention to leading indicators. And so we're going to specifically talk about that, kind of setting clear expectations and goal setting here, and then number two here. But so I think we'll kind of dig into that a little bit more. So, but first and foremost, like I was kind of saying, I'm a big operating rhythm guy. And so one of the things that we talk about here at Atrium, we have a terminology internally: the calendar is destiny, right? How you spend your time is how you end up, kind of managing your organization, et cetera. And excuse me. And so these are the way, and managers, if you are not prescriptive to them around how they should be spending their time per se, they may not make sufficient time for these sort of managerial behaviors. And as a result, what will consume all their time will be hopping on deals with their reps, which is a totally great use of time as managers, but not at the not at the cost of missing pipeline reviews or one-on-ones or what have you. And so these are just some examples of the football moves, if you will, that that managers can and ought to be engaged in. So pipeline reviews are a great example of this, kind of like a forecast call or what have you. Top to bottom, which involves top to bottom inspection of deals, kind of close dates, amounts, stages, forecasts, et cetera. This can be distinct from a deal strategy meeting where we're talking about very specific kind of like important deals. This is really but more about like inspection, like recurring inspection, to make sure that all the metadata is correctly, which of course, from an accountability standpoint, just oftentimes needs to happen. The second thing, so these are the things that managers have a tendency to just do because they love talking about deals, and like those are the things that are closest to the money. The things that folks have a tendency to maybe not do if it's not set on the calendar are things like one-on-one kind of performance check-in meetings. And so specifically, this is something that we popularize with the organizations that we work with, is that this is a meeting between the rep and the manager that is used to review the kind of the leading, intermediary, and output metrics for that the reps are being held accountable to, and just making sure that we are where we need to be. And if we're not, we can kind of course correct as appropriate. Typically, this ends up being not weekly; it ends up being kind of every other week, oftentimes, just because typically, especially with like AEs and AM reps, the metrics don't change week to week all that terribly much. SDRs certainly more so. But this ends up being something that like a lot of organizations don't have, and can be very impactful by putting a place on the calendar to compel conversation about these topics. It turns out that lo and behold, you're going to talk about your performance, you're going to talk about performance shortfalls, and you're going to get ahead of those things rather than looking back at the end of the quarter, which looking back at the end of quarter or the end of the month or the end of quarter is actually very important. It just can't be the only place where you do that kind of reflection. And a lot of organizations have a tendency to do these, which is important and great. The challenge with this is, and usually the reason why organizations do them quarterly is because the collection of the data ends up being so laborious that then it only makes sense to do that on a quarterly basis. And this is why using large language model AI and kind of like continuous monitoring of these leading indicators can be so powerful, because essentially these one-on-one meetings, these biweekly kind of performance check-ins, they're like mini QBRs, right? But QBRs are important. We can look back at the quarter and say, what was the shortfall and the driver and the improvement area, the constraint of each of these individual reps, which if you are doing these things, ideally those would have been identified in like intra-quarter as well, and perhaps remediated. And then of course call reviews end up being very helpful as well. I'm a big fan of doing those at 1.5x, and you can kind of oftentimes fold that in here. Lisa, any kind of comments you'd like to make on some of the operating rhythm modifications that you guys made in order to kind of like zhuzh up the performance management behaviors at Vimeo?
I would say what we do is pretty well aligned to this. One thing I will say is it's not an individual sport, right? This is not just reps and managers. It's the SDR,
Mm,
BDR organization, plus partners, plus renewal managers, plus like it's the whole sales team. Particularly when you get into deal reviews,
mm.
it's more about how can we help you close this deal instead of like an inspection and a test on like where you're going wrong. So it really needs to also be like very culturally positive and inclusive so that it really feels like they're not getting in trouble, but it's more, how can we help you do better?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of kind of splitting these up. And so the same way, the same way that organizations have a sales motion, and that's like the set of meetings and personas that should be involved in prosecuting a deal, organizations ought to have a intentionally like designed and declared sales management motion that essentially is a set of meetings and information consumption and kind of analysis that helps the organization kind of execute week to week, month to month. And so if you just have like a catch-all kind of grab bag of, yeah, we've got our one-on-one meeting in which we do pipeline review and maybe we do some deal strategy and maybe we talk about some performance stuff or whatever. And like that's just an open, like that's an hour block that happens once a week with each rep. Well, what ends up happening is uh, the deals are the only things that get talked about, and as a result, the deals that are at the bottom of the funnel are the only things that get talked about, and then you lose the rest of these things, right? And so, kind of like breaking these up into specific kind of jobs to be done can be a very powerful thing there. This is one of the this is the primary place where Atrium helps frontline sales managers is with exactly this. Like when you're coming in your team meeting and you want to understand exactly what's going on with the team based on their leading indicators and lagging indicators. When you're coming into your performance check-in with your rep and you want to understand where's this rep at from on their leading indicators and their intermediaries and their outputs, having the large language model AI do the synthesis of that in order to communicate that directly to the manager and kind of give them a pre-read on what's going well, what's not going well with respect to the rep, and then also the fact that it's communicating this to the rep as well. So when we come together for our performance check-in, everyone's on the same page. It's like, so I guess we're going to be talking about the fact that I didn't do any calling this week, right? And as a result, now we talk about blockers and how to resolve that versus kind of everyone hiding their head in the sand. Cool. Number two, and this is something I'm really excited to kind of get Lisa's perspective on because obviously she and her team were very thoughtful and intentional around setting kind of goals. It's really important to be uh, declarative around expected behaviors, right? And so most organizations, they will set goals on a bookings number, of course, right? But the problem is if you only do that and you don't set goals on precursors kind of upstream from that booking goal, it's very difficult for you to know as a sales organization, how are we tracking towards this because this is a lagging indicator. And then the second thing is it's very difficult for the reps to know what are the things that I should be doing from a behavioral standpoint in order to get to these things here. And so bookings is obviously real important, but there are lots of other leading indicators and intermediaries as well. Things like customer facing meeting volume, obviously like activities like emails, but usually like what can be more effective there for account executives, account managers would be unique accounts that have been interacted with. It's not just total number of opportunities and total pipe, but also inflow ends up being really important because that's a great place where reps can sometimes get tripped up. You can have what looks like a stocked pipe that maybe is unhygienic and has a lot of untouched opportunities in there and it's a bunch of stuff that needs to be closed out, but kind of paying attention to new opportunity inflow on like a weekly basis, or sorry, a monthly basis to make sure that reps kind of pipelines are being refilled is an example of a great leading indicator that oftentimes organizations don't pay sufficient attention to. And then lo and behold, at the end of the quarter, they're like, whoa, what happened? Like, why are we so tripped up here by this rep? Oh, it turns out that they haven't had any new opportunities come into their pipe in the last, in the last 2 months. Oops. So these are a variety of kind of like, there are others as well, but kind of being very clear about one, what the reps are going to be measured on. Two, what the appropriate levels are for those things. And then three, kind of like what the intervals are that you're going to be sampling that on. And so it's not just the account executives, it also ends up being SDRs as well. Kind of the metrics sometimes overlap. Maybe for enterprise reps, you're not going to be enterprise AEs, you're not going to be paying attention to things like as granular as email volume or what have you. But the unique number of accounts interacted with, or kind of like multi-threading within accounts, can be shared between AEs and SDRs. Lisa, was there anything you'd like to share around how you guys went about kind of setting these goals, kind of aligning on like what the metrics were going to be that reps were going to be held accountable to, and then the appropriate kind of levels for those various metrics?
It was really going back to that territory plan and showing the reps, like, here's your quota, here's how you need to get to it, so that they understood this is not an arbitrary number that RevOps or whoever came up with. This is actually what I need to do to get to my number. And if you break it down into months or quarters or weeks or days, here are the things that I need to do. So I think that is one. The other thing that we make sure that and I don't know if this is across all companies, but certainly true for ours, rep generated pipeline closes at a much higher rate.
Yes.
So for them to understand that, and they're like, okay, this is actually worth it for me to go out and do these calls and emails because I have a better chance of closing this pipeline that I'm generating myself. So I would say that's the other thing. And of course,
Yeah.
you may get some of these wrong, right? Like I've definitely got some of these targets wrong in the past. They can be, I mean, they're not in our comp plan. Obviously, they're quotas in the comp plan. But you set them based on what you think they're going to be. And, if there's some sort of outlier or something like that, it can be adjusted, right? Just making sure that
Totally.
you're having that continuous conversation with your teams and why you're setting them the way you are.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a good thing to note here, let me maximize this again. So these are just some examples of metrics. Oopsie daisy. Some example of kind of goals and metrics that one might set. But one really important thing is different organizations have different things they care about, right? So Vimeo was really focused on pipeline generation and calling and changing calling behavior. Other organizations we work with, sometimes organizations acquire a new company. For instance, if there's a new product and this is the year of like product Y, the new product, and like SKO is all lined up around that and all the enablement, and so and if you think about it, it's a whole organization initiative. RevOps is targeting is defining the suspect accounts that deserve an upsell conversation around this new product. And then, of course, the AEs are responsible for getting in there, positioning against that, creating expansion opportunities, making sure those expansion opportunities get to proof of concept or whatever, and then eventually closing them. What I just defined right there was like, a series of kind of leading indicators, intermediaries, and outputs, but a totally different initiative than like the Vimeo folks are talking about there. And so whatever the initiative is, whatever the thing is that your organization cares about, that you're trying to guide behavior to, that's where you need to set goals on. Like the way I like to talk about it is like the 20-yard line, the 50-yard line, and the red zone there. Because those, and then as Lisa points out, making sure that that's connected to like a monetary outcome for the reps, so they can understand, oh yes, got it. There's an expectation that 30% of my quota is going to be coming from this new product that we're selling, that the organization spent $100 million on buying last year. And in order to do that, I need to engage this many of the suspect accounts, create this many opportunities out of that, close them at this clip right here, etc. right? So whatever that is, whatever the behaviors are that you need to change, we can't just like, wish upon a star. You have to set the relevant goals on that, and then what ends up happening is that then folds into this, right? Like once you have this performance check-in um, rhythm, you can then fold new initiatives into that. So like you conquer an initial initiative, like, okay, great, we got the organization good at calling, wonderful. And then a new initiative shows up, which is, maybe it's pipe, like, oh man, we did such a good job at self-source pipeline that now everybody has overflowing pipes. And so now our new initiative is pipeline advancement and getting the amount of pipeline that we get to POC or whatever. I mean, I think we would all love to have a problem where we have too much pipeline, but you get my kind of my point there. So next, kind of the next thing I want to talk about here. So once we set these goals, right, and we select the metrics that are important, and we set the goals as appropriate, and we communicate them, why the organization should, why the reps should care about it. There's a variety of ways. We need to make sure that managers, leaders, and reps are inspecting those things, and that kind of goes back to the place where that happens, what we like to call a one-on-one performance check-in, what have you. There's a variety of ways that this can happen. The tried and true way of doing this, of course, is CRM reporting, because it's available. It's kind of in the system in question. Has a variety of challenges associated with it, as we kind of discussed earlier. Managers and reps don't necessarily love a dashboard, um, but this is kind of tried and true. Larger organizations may have kind of like fancier business intelligence setups, which can be great because maybe you bring data in from other sources. A lot of organizations that are usage based, we have a number of customers that have usage based kind of like bookings. It can be important to bring that in along with and marry that with the CRM data, with the usage data, in order to get information there. Kind of has the same challenges associated with the don't love a dashboard situation. And then of course, like what we like to propose to folks is that this is such an important topic, and then you have, like, for your SDRs, AEs, and AMs, that a dedicated performance management workflow solution ends up making a lot of sense there. But there's a variety of ways you can kind of skin this cat. And of course, what you can do as a sales operations leader is you can kind of help your managers and reps understand like where to look for these sort of things. Like, look for the outlier behaviors, whether that's like the bar chart that that pokes up above everybody else, or the bar chart that is below everybody else and maybe needs some help, right? To kind of help folks look for trends in the data, things like that. This is, you can teach managers and reps how to do this. Oftentimes, it requires a lot of like repetitions in order to really integrate this. But running kind of a clinic on how to kind of spot these issues can be useful. Uh, One thing that can be also very helpful is helping to unpack how those leading indicators flow into lagging indicators, right? So it's not just a question of like, hey, we set goals on these different things, but okay, bookings is composed of wins crossed with average selling price over deal cycle, and wins come from win rate crossed with attempts, and attempts comes from opportunity, like total opportunities in pipe, and also new opportunity inflow. And by the way, win rate comes from a variety of things, but it's quality of deal execution. What would be drivers of that? Well, multi-threading might be a good example of that. Conversion between stages, hygiene, untouched opportunities. And so helping managers understand, and also reps understand where they can diagnose. Like if somebody's got a win rate problem, that typically is going to be coming from one of these upstream things over here. If they don't have a win rate thing, but it's literally they just don't have enough at bats, then the question is, okay, is this because we don't have enough ops in pipe? Are we not having enough, new opportunity inflow? Or maybe our wins is just fine, but for whatever reason, our deals are substantially smaller than everybody else. Okay, where's that coming from? Are we discounting too much? Are we just putting baby deals into the pipe? Is our average op size in pipe not great? whatever it is, right, whatever the constraint is, there's usually an upstream kind of root cause that if we detect that, we can then go and manage around that. But again, this is kind of double black diamond skiing. This is kind of more in the realm of RevOps than kind of management land, but it can be helpful. And so then lastly, we have to talk about these things, right? So we can, we can inspect every dashboard we create. We can create a bunch of different goals, and then have the relevant assets in place. But if managers are not going to actually talk about these things, and instead are going to are going to admire a problem as opposed to tackling a problem, then we're not going to get behavior change happening with our reps. And so what this means is helping our managers get better at having performance conversations. A great place, a great way of tackling this is just making sure that there's time on the calendar for that to actually to happen, right? So like, all right, cool. I guess we're here in our performance check-in meeting. That's literally called a performance check-in meeting. I guess we're going to check in on your performance. And so making sure that that's happening frequently. And then there's finesse things associated with this as well, which is, infusing it with positivity, making sure that we're talking about the reason why we're doing this is to get people to their number and make them successful, but being very clear about like what the issue is. It's a lot easier to be clear about what the issue is once you have very kind of clear indicators of where performance should be at, because we can literally just point to that and say, hey, we all talked about this. Remember Lisa's team did all that work in order to figure this out for us, and it looks like we're light right here. So let's go ahead and talk about what might be causing that, and then let's come to an agreement as to how we're going to tackle that together, right? Like just like any behavior, whether it's a golf swing or making a recipe or what have you, doing it, like the repetition of this behavior makes it such that managers get better at it, which of course means getting it on the calendar such that these things are happening. It can be very effective to have a kind of assets associated with this. Some organizations use one-on-one software like Lattice or Culture Amp or what have you for these things. Atrium is actually in the process of making we have a new product that's being developed called specifically a performance check-in workflow in order to persist off kind of these conversations and kind of the existing performance on a week by week basis. And then of course, if you're doing this enough, then there should be recurring diagnosis of whatever shortfalls there are, and then hopefully there's remediation of that, right? Like, hey, we flagged this issue right here. We talked about what the problem was. We unblocked it. It turned out that there was something broken with your territory. You got with RevOps. We fixed that. Now you are unblocked to go and do that prospecting. Or alternatively, if the even after being unblocked, the behavior doesn't change, and it persists over time, that's the point at which we should be using performance improvement plans. And again, like a performance improvement plan, kind of like a QBR. The reason why both of these things historically have had these like kind of like oh no connotations associated with them is because they don't happen sufficiently enough, right? Performance improvement plans sound scary because usually the only time that they're applied is after something has gotten so bad that we need to like it's probably things are too far gone. And this is why bringing the frequency of these things up can make this way better. Cool. So Lisa, maybe you can kind of share kind of like some of the approaches the Vimeo organization has taken in kind of helping the managers be more proactive about these performance conversations, and then any sort of like kind of mechanics and tooling associated with that documentation and kind of like memorialization workflow.
Yeah. So we started a pipeline council shortly after I started at Vimeo, which is basically our CRO, CMO, RevOps, sales leaders, and we surface a lot of these exact things. So Atrium actually helped us put together call blitz Tuesdays. We're having issues with people not wanting to call or not knowing who to call and all of that. So we started a Call Blitz Tuesday initiative. So Atrium helped us put together some some dashboards, guys, and some metrics around that, which have been huge. Like just servicing those metrics to our C-level and our executives. Our managers want to be on that leaderboard, right? They want to see their name at the
Right.
top of the Call Blitz Tuesday board. And we call out a specific rep every week that has done a really good job. So if you're a
There you go.
competitive rep and you want to do a good job, you want your name up there. You know, if we're showing like the top 10 reps, you want to be on that leaderboard. So those are the kinds of things that we're doing that aren't necessarily one-on-ones, though we do those, are other ways of helping, you know, kind of get the message across that these are the things that we're tracking. So that's just another way that we do it.
Nice. Yeah, and then I think the important thing that we hear from folks too is like, you know, the end of performance management is to help improve people, or alternatively, if they're not going to improve and this isn't a fit for them from a behavioral standpoint, it's important for organizations to identify that and act accordingly. And so a good example of that is like when you get to the point where you're trying to figure out, is this person the right fit for the business? You know, there's the age old kind of will versus skill way of looking at that. And so, you know, reps that have will and skill issues, right? So they're low activity and kind of like low kind of conversion kind of quality metrics. So, you know, low customer, in the case of an account executive, this would be like low customer facing meeting volume, kind of like non-adherence to prospecting behavior. And what you see is like low conversion rate between opportunities, and maybe like, you know, pipeline hygiene issues. Those are skill topics. Those are the folks that really just don't seem like they're in it to win it at all, and are probably the ones that you should probably look at offboarding first. If folks have you know, will deficits, usually those are indicative of someone who just maybe isn't in it, like isn't comfortable with the high activity nature of sales. Um, and so that can be a red flag as well. With folks that have skill, usually what you want to, skill issues that are high will, right? So high activity, they're doing the things that are being asked of them, but maybe they're doing it in a way that isn't the highest conversion thing possible. That can be a place for upskilling, right? And kind of investing there, which then goes back to, if that, you know, if that remediates through coaching behaviors and kind of role playing and what have you, then lovely. But if for whatever reason, after having you know, addressed that over time, it doesn't remediate, you know, that could be a place where you might want to offboard someone. Cool. So that's the last kind of topic I wanted to cover here is like, these are really the big things that you want to do. Is you want to make sure that there's time for folks to do these things, set clear expectations on this, and make sure the managers are inspecting and detecting there, and then importantly, talking about those things and kind of managing as you know, accordingly. So I think that's all the time that we had here today. In parting, what I'll do is, if folks are interested in tackling kind of the topic of the sales performance gap, we just wrote this book that we'd love your feedback on. We'll go ahead and drop the link here for folks to go ahead and sign up for that. But otherwise, Lisa, I would love to thank you very much for taking the time to hang out with us today and being an amazing customer. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much.
Thank
Okay,
you,
bye.
Lisa. Thanks everyone for joining.